So before we jump into the podcast with Lexicona, I do want to just apologize in advance. There has been a little bit of editing issue, a bunch of white noise that I couldn't quite remove properly all the way in post-editing. So there is a little bit of white noise there from certain microphones, and it's nobody else's fault than mine. So just keep that in mind, and once again I do apologize for this. But let's just jump into episode number 3 with Lexicona. Alright everybody, welcome to the Speedrunner podcast, episode number 3. I am here today with Lexicona. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you very much for asking. How are you?
I am doing fantastic today.
Glad to hear it.
So before we jump into the hard-hitting questions here, tell us a little about yourself.
So as Penguin said, my name is Lexicona. I am what I consider a former speedrunner. I've been speedrunning for probably, definitely not as long as some other people, but for, I'd say, a good 3-4 years. And I've speedrun many different games, ranging from Final Fantasy IV to Nier Automata to all these different sorts of games. So ultimately, I have a lot of, I've experienced a lot of different games, but I am pretty inexperienced as a whole. However, I say former speedrunner because I kind of gave up speedrunning at some point. But actually recently, because of this podcast, it has made me want to start going back to it. So, yeah, but that's me. Is there anything you would like to maybe know about me specifically, or?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for that. That's a big honor for saying that. That you want to get into speedrunning. Not, I'm saying mainly, but partly because of the podcast.
Of course.
But yeah, we're gonna get into that a little bit more. I want to go back though through the years, and just to ask you, how did you get into speedrunning in the first place?
Yeah. So funny thing is, I've thought about this myself, and honestly, I couldn't tell you.
Really?
Yeah. So I've thought sometimes, what was it that really got me into speedrunning? And the best thing I could come up with an answer for would be Dark Souls. I was really interested in speedrunning Dark Souls and or Bloodborne around the time that I got a PS4, and I got Bloodborne with the PS4. And I looked into those, and I saw, oh, hey, people are doing this really cool thing called speedrunning. It looks really interesting. I want to do it. And this is, of course, what I think happened. And so I do remember I had a notepad that my uncle had given me. And I just started writing notes. I was watching the world record run, and I was just writing notes. They do this, they do that, they do this. And, I never really got into Bloodborne speedrunning or anything like that. But, that was my start, and I became a lot more aware of speedrunning and of the speedrun community. Eventually, a few years passed, I had played Fire Emblem Awakening, and I thought, it'd be cool to speedrun this game. The community wasn't really that big at the time, and I didn't know there were communities themselves. There just weren't a lot of runs. So I maybe did a run or two of that, got an unofficial world record in the New Game Plus category on my first try. Of course, it's unofficial, so I can't provide proof, but it was timed on my phone.
But still, GG, nonetheless.
Yeah. But yeah, so that occurred, and then I looked into Final Fantasy IV, and I was doing runs of that, and I participated in the Mysidia Mayhem 2, or 2nd edition, I guess. Whatever it's called. Give me a moment to think. I guess tournament, because people were competing. Yeah, it was a tournament. And we were all just competing against each other. I had a little bit of screen time. I commentated a run or two. But I didn't really make myself my identity in speedrunning until Nier Automata had come out on PC. I really looked forward to Nier Automata. I wanted to play it, and I got it. I bought it the day before it came out, and, I loved it. I loved that game. After I beat the first ending, I immediately looked into the speedrun community and started making my way through that, playing the game, doing the runs, things like that. eventually I had developed at least somewhat of a name for myself. Some people still know me in that community, but I'm pretty much just like, I'm old news when it comes to that game. From there, my computer, which I mentioned is old, started having some issues running the game, so I shifted over to games that were less intensive, such as Final Fantasy 13, etc., 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 and then it snowballed from there.
All right. Interesting. So, obviously, most people who speedrun, they tend to eventually, one way or another, end up going to Twitch and live streaming their speedruns there. So, how did you get into streaming? Was it because of the speedruns, or did you do any streaming prior to that?
Yeah, so I'm relatively young compared to a lot of other streamers. I'm 21 years old, and I found Twitch when I was probably 15. And I followed a lot of streamers, and streaming was something I wanted to do. I was one of those kids in middle school that looked up to the YouTubers and wanted to be a YouTuber. And so when I found Twitch and I found the type of community that it was and the type of platform that it was, it really just shifted a lot of my passion. I don't stream as much nowadays, as much as I'd like to, but that's due to other issues that are unrelated to this. But yeah, I found streaming, and one day I was browsing Twitch and I found some Dark Souls or Bloodborne speedruns or whatever, and that ties into what we just talked about.
All right, so that actually kind of segues into my next question there. What was your first speedrun that you saw? But it was Bloodborne and Dark Souls then.
It was one of the two. Again, I don't remember enough about them to really say anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to forget those things as well. I can't even...
That was 4 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't remember the first streamer I saw on Twitch. I know the first game I saw was probably StarCraft 2 because I was super into that scene at the moment, or at the time. But I cannot remember who was the first streamer I ever watched. That's a super difficult question, unless you're like got perfect memory or actually wrote it down. Like, I don't think many people can answer it.
For me, if the game was Dark Souls, I could probably tell you who it was, or at least the person who really helped me refine those speedrunning tastes. The speedrunner that I really watched around the time for Dark Souls. I don't want to name drop unless you want me to, just for anonymity purposes.
Feel free to name drop or shout out anyone.
Yeah, I don't hang around his community anymore. I tend to stray from certain communities at times. But his name was Immersed Kemp. He was a really, really cool guy, really nice fella. And he was the guy I really watched, and he helped me kind of foster that speedrunning energy. I know that much. I don't remember where it started, but I know that I watched a lot of it through him.
So you mentioned once you started off there with Final Fantasy IV, you got an unofficial world record there.
That was Fire Emblem.
Oh, Fire Emblem. My apologies. But I've noticed over your speedrun.com user, there's some various places that you've ended up on and such. And I just want to ask you, like, when you got into speedrunning and just before you ended or stopped speedrunning, what was your goal with speedrunning?
When it comes to like my goal for speedrunning, are you talking at the time of starting or now, or both?
Let me. I can rephrase that a little bit. Like, okay. Instead of goal, like, what was your motivator? Why did you speedrun? Comparing to when you first started off speedrunning to when you stopped speedrunning, like.
Yeah, I don't really know. That sounds weird. I think I just thought it was cool. I just thought, oh my god, these people are playing games I like really quickly. And I think a subconscious motivator is that I wanted to experience these games again. I wanted to kind of relive that experience of playing it for the first time. But with added challenges along the way, such as, let's take Final Fantasy 13, for example. It has challenge runs where you don't really effectively level up your characters. If you don't know how FF13 works, that's the best way I can describe it. And, stuff like that really helps somebody properly re-experience a game, besides the story. I think that was a big motivator for me to actually get into speedrunning, is to re-experience it, to live through it, and to really be a part of that game.
All right, so it was mostly like a nostalgia value, like reliving the game, having a reason to play through it again, essentially.
Yeah, I think so, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. So how much did you practice your speed runs, or was it more just a case of learning the run and just playing through it for the fun of it, or did you actually do any practice to try and get some kind of competitive time?
Yeah, so this actually starts to go. This starts with Fire Emblem, but really only starts to take precedence with Nier Automata. I was very surprised when I got that Fire Emblem unofficial world record. Of course, I didn't submit it because obviously it was recorded on my phone. I didn't actually record the run. I just recorded the time. But I practiced that for a couple days before actually timing it, and I got some of the menuing down. When it came to Nier Automata, which, as I mentioned, was really my first break, the first time I actually pursued speedrunning for speedrunning's sake, I did a bit of practice, but I kind of had words from somebody I used to watch a lot. They kind of rang in my head, and that is, don't practice off stream if you plan on becoming a more popular streamer, and by no means take this as real advice. This is just something that was running through my head. Don't practice off stream if you plan on streaming speedruns regularly, because that practice could turn into stream content.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, your viewers can potentially help you out with the practice.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I mean, I don't necessarily believe that statement per se anymore, but it was what was mostly going through my head at the time. And so, I would practice, but ultimately I wanted to do the runs. I didn't care much about practice. For me, doing the run itself was the practice, unless it was an out of bounds skip or something. I wanted competitive times, but I feel like that was more me pushing myself unhealthily, and not understanding my limits and what I really wanted out of speedrunning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're mostly, or primarily, an RPG speedrunner, considering the games you speedrun. What has been the most difficult things about speedrunning? Either speedrunning as a general whole or specifics in games?
I favor longer games, but the big common denominator that I've found with every game that I speedrun is its music. As for, your question was about difficulties in speedrunning. Personal pressure is a big one. Similar to the first episode of the podcast, it was you guys talked about, personal pressure, mental health, etc. And I really resonated with that. Because something people constantly say among the community is speedrunning is a hobby. Enjoy it. And to a degree, I understand that, but there is also kind of a mentality that a lot of people don't want to talk about, where it's very competitive. It's similar in some cases, maybe not to this degree, but similar to, say, League of Legends and esports. Many people want to go for that gold. They want to be that top esports player, and they put all that pressure on themselves, even though for a lot of them, they're not going to achieve that. And so the pressure, the why am I doing this questions that eventually came up in my head, that was the hardest part for me in speedrunning. The games are the games.
There's a lot of correlation to what you're saying with esports. If you compare it to maybe, let's say, 8 years ago, when I was really, really, really into the StarCraft 2 scene, commentating on master level gameplays and that kind of thing. But when it came down to when I wanted to do the ladders for ranked, just pressing that play button caused so much anxiety. It was insane. And it's something I can relate to even today. I've kind of hit that wall. That's why I've taken a break from streaming at the moment, because I've set everything up, OBS is ready to go, and just pressing that start streaming button, there's so much anxiety related to it, and that's why it could be healthy to taking a break. But it's like you said, it's a little bit of a taboo, with not only within speedrunning community, but with streaming in general, that a lot of people don't want to talk about, that there is a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of questions that arise. It's oh my god, is this going to be good content? Is anyone actually going to watch? That kind of thing. So I completely agree with you there.
On the topic of streaming itself, diverting from speedrunning, I personally wanted to stream full time at some point. And I also wanted to enjoy streaming. I never stuck to a game, and I would say that was a big downfall in my stream. I never really hit past 10 viewers consistently. It's just a fact of reality. I didn't get too popular in the time that I cared about streaming. Now the only times I stream is really when I'm raiding in Final Fantasy XIV and in my recent attempts to go back to speedrunning. Just kind of, for me, it wasn't anxiety when it came to streaming, it was depression. It was nobody's talking in my chat, nobody's sitting in my stream. And if I can't talk to myself, nobody's going to continue to stay here. And that pressure of what's the point if nothing is going to improve was really the biggest issue. And I feel like that can also translate to speedrunning. If, like how I was for, say, FF13, I really just hit a wall. I could not improve. At least I didn't think I could. I kept resetting my runs over stupid issues in the first chapter out of 13 chapters. Things that would lose maybe a minute when I had 25 minutes to save. Just kind of that impending, like, this isn't worth it idea that stuck in my mind. That was the biggest issue. I've never really been the insanely competitive person when it came to this sort of stuff. So it wore me down. It wore me down greatly, and that's why I took such a long break.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to what you're saying there as well, especially when you're in that mindset of, all right, I want to climb the leaderboard at least a couple of places. I want to improve in this. And then you start getting nitpicky about small stuff. I don't know, have you ever seen a Final Fantasy X-2 speedrun?
I have, very briefly. I'm not 100% familiar with it.
Yeah, so basically, for those who don't know, the ones who are really competitive about it, they will play the intro about 50 times probably until they get that perfect start to the game.
That's just JRPG speedrunning in a nutshell.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But that just shows like the dedication, and they're like, I understand from that point of view why people just feel like they're hitting a wall, mm-hmm. because there is a point in most speedruns when you have to be nitpicky. But the question is, when do you want to take that nitpicking into consideration?
And overall, do you want to take that nitpicking into consideration? Because sometimes people just want to speedrun for speedrunning's sake. They'll compete against themselves, but like, take the person who used to be called Albrecht. He is now called Vernie. Somebody I've watched for years was third on the FF13 leaderboard for some time. I don't know if he still is. He speedruns, and unless he does something fatal to the run, he always completes his run. That's the sort of stamina I want for myself, And I think that's something a lot of people could take a page out of his book, in that you don't need every run to be a PB. Sometimes a run could be 10 minutes over your run, and as long as the run is still finishable, why not finish it?
Yeah, exactly. And there's always usually something to learn, especially if you're new to speedrunning or haven't done it for a long time. Even if you're behind 10 minutes or you're losing time or it's not a PB, there's always something in the run that will make you, oh, this is going to be a time saver next run.
Yeah, you could also have moments where it's like, well, I'm coming up on this moment, so I think I'm just going to get there. I'm going to practice this skip because I want to practice it in a run setting, and then we'll reset. Like, having that restraint to just not hit that reset button immediately is, I think, a very important skill for a lot of speedrunners to develop.
Oh, absolutely. But moving on a little bit, let's flip that side of the coin. And what's the most fun thing about speedrunning, do you think?
The same reason I started in the first place, experiencing games. Reliving that experience of sorts. As I mentioned before, music was a very common denominator in video games that I speedran, because music is very important to me as a person. And so when I ran a game that I felt had great music, which was every game that I ran, I would just love those moments that I get at the end of the run when it's playing that triumphant finale against the final boss. it's the most fun thing for me in speedrunning is re-experiencing it, and that's the only way I can describe it is the nostalgia, the very short-term nostalgia of beating the game again.
Right, so we've touched on this next topic a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper there. How do you think speedrunning compares to other sports and esports as a whole?
I mean, I think it's similar. I won't say the same, because there are very stark differences when it comes to them, but they are definitely very similar. There are obvious differences, such as athletic ability versus mental ability. Some can be more mentally taxing than the others. And others can be more physically taxing than some. But ultimately, I think they're two sides of the same coin. They're very similar activities with very similar goals in mind, depending on where you want to go with them. Sometimes people just want to play friendly family soccer. You're out on a picnic with your whole, maybe your dad's side of the family, and they love soccer like my dad's side does. And so they all play soccer as a family with, no scoring or anything like that. It's just for fun. And sometimes you're at the World Cup.
Yeah, just stroll on in there. But do you reckon speedrunning could be considered an esport?
I think it could, but there would need to be very specific barriers that need to be set in that regard. Such as, the goal of speedrunning. Let's use League of Legends as an example again, because it was really a major pioneer in popularizing esports. The goal of League of Legends is to win, is to be the best. Whereas you can look at speedrunning, and the goal of speedrunning is to be the best you can be. And it's a very specific difference in the sense that, yeah, you want to beat other people's times, but the only person you're racing against is yourself. It's like Mario Kart time trials. Sure, there are other times that other people are performing, but when you're in that race, the only other person there is that ghost. The ghost that you set previously. It's man versus themselves and not man versus, nature or whatever. That whole chart of man versus God, man versus nature, man versus machine.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here a little bit as well. As I see where you're coming from, absolutely, I agree. In the core of things, speedrunning is usually down to the one person doing the run. But when comparing it to esports, going back to League of Legends there, for example, there's two kinds of people. There's the kind of people who play the game to just, it's a game, you're supposed to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's the people who play competitive, who wants to climb the ladder, who wants to be the best. And the same goes there for speedrunning. There's essentially, if you're being really generalizing here, there's also the same two kind of people. There are those who run the game for nostalgic value, they just want to have fun, they want to have a reason to play through the game again. And then there are those who desperately want that number one spot. So I also do see the similarity there that for me personally, I think certain speedrunning, certain games in speedrunning could be one day considered esport level because they are just so competitive. Like Super Mario 64, for example, there are so many people running it, or Pokemon, and there are so small differences between some of the world records, like the 1, 2, 3 spots in those categories, that the people that are running it, they are probably seeing it as a competitive thing. I'm not saying they're not having fun in what they're doing, but they're probably seeing it like, I need to get this number one spot somewhere deep inside. Maybe not their primary reason for doing the speedrun, but I'm sure it's a big part of it.
Question for you, because this is going to be a comparison that I make in response. I assume you went to high school, correct?
Yeah.
Did your high school have maybe a robotics team or anything like that?
It did not. No.
Okay. Basically, for those who don't know, robotics teams, and this may be something unique to the U.S., because my high school had it, and I know a lot of other high schools have it. Basically, what they do is they make robots, and they're robots. They program them and everything, and then they pilot them around, and they complete certain objectives. And these competitions are held where whoever gets the most points wins, effectively. I like to think of speedrunning as that sort of thing. Robotics on its own doesn't require competitors. It's completely solitary. You can do it on your own and have fun with it. But if you're going to make something like a robotics competition, that's a different story. That's a situation where you're using this personalized hobby where you can do it all on your own and compete with others. That's similar to, say, a speedrunning race. And that's really similar to what I consider speedrunning as a sport to be. I consider it more of a performance. Because sports are, I feel, very competitive in nature. And I don't feel that speedrunning is... Like, it's competitive, but it's competitive, again, in my eyes, as against oneself, unless they wish to challenge another person. I think this argument really just comes down to opinion.
Exactly, yeah. There's no real right or wrong answer here, because there are so many people who are doing speedruns, and there's so many opinions. Some people consider it to be, no, it's a competition, I have to be the best. Other people are more like you and me, just want to have fun with it. And it's, like you said, a performance. And that's why I like this question, because not only does it bring out whoever's on the podcast opinion about it, and it widens my view of it, but it's also, I think it could be an important question if this was to be a topic one day. Like, should speedrunning be a competitive thing for prize money and tournaments and races and that kind of thing? It really sets down to the competitor's mentality, how they want to look at it. Someone who just runs it for nostalgia, sure, they might enter a tournament, but then again, they might not be that upset if they're knocked out either way, because they've had fun doing it. But at the same time, you have the person entering the tournament who really wants to win that prize money. They're going to be really upset if they're knocked out, for example.
Yeah, you run a heavy risk of developing a hyper-competitive culture to something that is really just rooted in a hobby. Because, speedrun for whatever reason you want. If you want to get that world record, you strive for that world record. I will cheer you on. But don't force other people to do so as well. And if it were to become such a big thing, like an esport, I feel that it would start to run that risk. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it would be something that has to be controlled. And it would have to be community policed. We would have to watch each other and check each other.
Yeah, absolutely. But then again, it will always be voluntarily as well. You can't force someone into a tournament and that kind of thing. So it's really your own fault.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's your own fault. Right, so I want to move on a little bit here as well. I know you've taken part in RPG Limit Break.
Yes.
In 2017 there, and FF15 as well. What are your thoughts on events like AGDQ or ESA or RPG Limit Break?
Yeah, so for context, so those who don't know, RPG Limit Break 2017, I was on the couch for Nier Automata at the beginning of the convention, and FF15 about halfway through the convention. My opinions on events such as those, I don't mind them. Ultimately, there's two parts to it. There's the part where you're going because you want to support the charity that they're supporting, and that's great. But then there's the other side where you're going because you want to see speedruns. And I think that's also good. Maybe not just as good, because, charity is always going to be a great thing. But you're going because you want to support your passion. I don't really have a problem with that. I think my biggest opinion on those sorts of events is when they occur, we need to be real with ourselves. We need to tell ourselves and be honest. Why are we coming here? What are we doing this for? Because before RPG Limit Break and while we were there, I was of the type that I cared about the charity. RPG Limit Break supporting Nami, I suffer from really severe depression sometimes. Or I have severe depression, but sometimes it affects me worse than others. It's part of my life. But I was there because I wanted to speedrun and I wanted to support the speedruns. That was why I was there. And it sounds selfish, but I'm just being honest. And yet I had been told multiple times, oh no, we're all here because of the charity. We're doing this because it's a good cause. And while I support that, it's not why I was there. We all have our reasons for being there, for meeting people, for doing things. And I think they're great events. They're great places where people can really, truly express themselves and, be who they are. and while also supporting something so good and so grand. I also, though, have some negative opinions in the realm of, I feel that these events kind of lose themselves in that supporting charity, and they, in some ways, need to recognize the influence they have over the popularity of the people that will be attending the event.
What do you mean when you say that they're losing themselves in the charity? Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's like I had said before. It's always focused on that, and that's what they're here for. That's why they're doing it. They're raising money for charity. But it's easy to turn a blind eye to the way that your actions affect others in any case. And I think in this situation, sometimes they'll host certain people on streams, or they'll do something just because that person can bring in more money for the charity, while effectively a lot of the time ignoring how that may affect or minimally affect the person's popularity or whatever on Twitch. I'm not saying that's the goal or the point of it, but it's something that needs to be considered when it comes to these events, and the fact that they are followed by such a large crowd. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes all the sense. And like there's been a lot of talk about mostly, if I'm being blatantly honest, AGDQ lately as well. But
are we talking about the Lesbelheim issue?
Oh yeah, we're not gonna deep down into that one. But like AGDQ, there's been some at ESA, and I'm not too sure if there's been any like real controversies at RPG Limit Break. But I kind of agree with you as well as I disagree, in the sense that what you were saying earlier there about people going there, being there for the charity. I mean, I think it's from a marketing perspective, people are saying it like, yes, I am a good person. I am here because I want to support this charity. But at the same time, they're also there for the speedrunning. It doesn't have to be one or the other. They are there. But it ultimately, as humans, it looks better if we say we're there for the charity. If I'm being brutally honest.
No, you're fine. I completely get where you're coming from.
But I think the majority of the people there are there for the speedrunning, or to just meet up with people within the community they haven't met before. They've only talked to online. Because I've seen a lot of people on Twitter and Instagram and Twitch as well who legitimately are excited to go to these events just to meet the people they talk to on a regular basis, face to face. And that's what I think is one of the great things about these events, that they bring people together not only online but in the physical realm as well.
Yeah, and that was why I went to RPG Limit Break. Me being on... Funny story, the reason I was on the Nier Automata couch in Limit Break, while I'm not necessarily proud of my commentary on that run, it was the first time I had ever couched anything at an event like that. Me being on that was literally, oh hey, somebody's running Nier Automata glitchless, a category that I pioneered when I was a part of the community. I'm gonna commentate that, and I told him, hey, I'm commenting your run, and he's like, oh, okay. And Final Fantasy 15 was very similar. Kills Little Monster, the guy who ran the run, he and I both submitted our runs. His was admitted, mine was a backup, just in case something were to happen. And so as a result, I had already plans to go, and he said, yeah, you'll couch my run. We'll go. That's good. But I was there because I wanted to meet the people, and that was my initial motivation. I've learned a lot of things through going there, and I have formed many opinions, some of which are maybe not appropriate for the conversation we're currently having. But yeah, it goes with what you had said. Many people go there because they want to experience that tight-knit community that it develops.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned a little bit about the controversies and such as well. And we're not going to go into the whole Luzbelheim situation. That's
a whole can of worms that doesn't need to be opened.
That's a whole podcast in itself. And there are many, many different opinions on it. But I'm gonna touch on the subject matter a little bit. And if you just take a quick look at Google, the most common question in regards to transgender people and speedrunning is, why are there so many transgender people within the speedrunning community. And it raises an interesting topic. Like, why do you think this is? And for those who don't know how we got into this subject, just Google up the AGDQ Luzbelheim and you'll get all your answers there. But why do you think this is?
Okay, so to bring up for context, in case anybody doesn't know, in the podcast, I am a transgender woman. I don't really make it too heavily a part of my identity, but I do have experiences that would be good to answer this sort of question. Side note, if you go into my Final Fantasy 15, or the Final Fantasy 15 run that I commentated at RPG Limit Break 2017, you can find that on YouTube. There's actually a thread in the comments. Let me pull up the thread, and I'm not going to say any names. Final Fantasy 15, RPG Limit Break 2017. And the thread is probably oh god, it might have actually been deleted? I don't know. But yeah, it was basically saying, like, you can obviously tell the people involved in RPG Limit Break are the people behind SGDQ. That was paraphrasing. And to clarify, if you couldn't tell, they were very clearly talking about me because I was, I'm a trans woman and I maybe didn't look the part of, a cis woman. Which is fine. I don't care. Yeah, here's the thread. It just got 20 replies, and this question actually came up as, why do you think there are so many people in the community? And I don't know. If I'm going to be completely honest, I don't have an answer because I don't know why people do what they want to do. However, my thoughts on the topic come from experience, and this is what I think tends to be a common denominator in this regard. Trans women specifically, we are, quote, raised as boys. To put it very roughly. As a result, a lot of us being brought up are taught, video games are for boys and not for girls. And so a lot of us think, okay, we're a boy. We're also social outcasts because we don't fit in because our minds don't work like the other people's a lot of the time. And so we tend to turn to video games. As for why speedrunning draws that, I couldn't tell you. I have no clue. But that's at least why I think there are so many trans women in video gaming itself, specifically.
And it's like, you couldn't tell me really why, but how do you think it compares to like other, in lack of a better word, but categories on, let's say, Twitch, for example, like other casual communities, like gaming communities or music or let's play or just chatting communities. In your mind, why do you think the transgender community is more drawn to speedrunning than any other? I'm not saying it is, but in this case, just for the topic of debate.
Again, I honestly have no clue. I think it's more something that is being more pronounced because a lot of people are finding themselves and they're finding, hey, there are accepting people. I can be honest about myself. I can come out. And that may be why it seems like there's so many people when in reality it's a completely normal amount. It really comes down to what people are used to. It's like, I'm used to seeing all these non-trans people and now there's all these trans people. It's very different for them.
So at the end of the day, you could kind of just say, it justifies that the speedrunning community as a whole is a very warm and open community that welcomes everybody, and that's why a lot of transgender people feel safe to come out as a transgender person within that community.
Yeah, a lot of people, and this is going more into the the psychological aspect of it, a lot of trans people, like, some of them know they're trans, some of them don't, but trans people regardless are still trans. At the end of that person's life, after they've died, if they came out at that point in their life, you can say, at least with the information we're given, they are a trans person, or they are a gay person, or whatever. So it really comes down to fostering this community that is willing to stand up for each other. And I think you hit the nail on the head. The speedrunning community tends to be very nice and very open to people, and people feel more comfortable coming out. You look at a lot of chats that are very hostile towards these sorts of things, and it's because they're behind a screen. They have that anonymity. But when you're interacting with somebody, you're helping them speedrun, you're not thinking about, are they a boy, are they a girl, are they in Les Bellheim's case, are they demi non-binary, anything like that. You're thinking about, who is this person? They want to speedrun this game. I want to help them, more often than not. And people want to be themselves, and so that lets them be themselves. It's a big deal for us to be ourselves, to come out. So even if it may not be a big deal for speedrunning, it's kind of just a heavy weight off of our shoulders that we can let loose.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, going back to the whole debacle and debate there, there's something, from my understanding, I'm not too involved, or I haven't read up on the whole thing entirely, but from my understanding, some runners think, or viewers as well for that matter, think it's required for all speedrunners to have their pronouns stated on various social media, aka basically Twitter. Do you agree with this, that all speedrunners should state their pronouns?
I know the sentiment and I know the argument. A lot of people say, and I'm not explicitly saying or stating agreement or disagreement with this, a lot of people say people should do this to normalize the use of pronouns so that trans people can feel more comfortable in spaces, so that people don't feel like they're going to be known for being trans when they put pronouns in their profile. It's a completely reasonable argument and completely valid point. I think it is on us as people to really make sure that we are letting people feel welcome. And so if you have no personal problem with it, if you're like, yeah, I'm a boy, my pronouns are he, him, I want people to refer to me as such, put them in your bio. It's no big deal. In my specific case, I don't think it should be required in any regard. If we're talking about requirements, I don't think it should be required. I think it should be heavily encouraged. But somebody like me who is a trans woman, and maybe I don't want everybody to know, at some point, maybe I want this all to blow past me and I want to just live my life as a woman, not a trans woman. And that's more with the connotation that comes with that. I'm maybe going to omit it just for my own personal comfort, because in the current state of things, a lot of people will immediately notice, oh, they put pronouns in their bio. That means they're a trans person. It's not true, but it's the current state of appearance. And so at that point, you have to be willing to sacrifice that image with the superficial people, or not care. And if you really want to support trans people in our endeavor, I would heavily encourage you to do it. But I don't think it's a requirement. It comes down to really your level of personal comfort in doing so.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Personally, from my standpoint, I support it all. I'm like, all love is good love. You do you. I'm not one to judge. Personally, for me, I don't think it's required for my own personal Twitter, for example, to state my pronoun. But if someone was to call me a she, for example, or a they, I wouldn't be too upset about it either. But that's just from my my personal perspective. I completely can understand both sides of the coin. People who are arguing against it and for it. But at the end of the day, for me personally, it's just, you do you. I'm fine with supporting everything, but I don't think it should spill out on the rest of the people. If you want to support in one way or another, that's great. That's fantastic. But I don't think it should be a requirement. And I understand the prejudice as well, that well, not prejudice, but that the preformed image that putting your pronoun
Preconception.
Yeah, preconception. That's the word. Thank you. For putting your pronoun on your Twitter bio, for example, will make people think that, oh, they've got their pronoun there. That means they're a transgender person, when that's not the case. But then again, I also think that the people who do this in support also don't mind if someone were to call them a transgender person, because then they can then that gives them a reason to bring up the discussion and spread more awareness to it. So it's just win-win at the end of the day.
Yeah, completely agree. It's, again, it comes down to your own level of personal comfort, and it's, and when we go into this, modern world where the lines of gender are becoming increasingly blurred, it's no longer male-female as it was in maybe the 20s, or, except for those who were non-binary back then.
Even like 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago, it was very uncommonly accepted for something such as non-binary to exist. Unfortunately, I'm very glad that we've made the progress that we have. But when we look at the modern world with the blurred lines of gender, if you're going to not have your pronouns in your bio, you need to be willing to accept that people are going to refer to you as they sometimes to be safe. People are going to maybe mess up, and that is in some way or another, whether it be putting your pronouns in your bio or not, you're going to kind of experience what trans people experience in either being misgendered or being assumed that you're trans. A lot of, as awareness of trans people becomes more prominent and accepted, people are going to very quickly realize that a lot of the intolerance and whatnot is not going to work out for them.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, intolerance it doesn't work out. It's the human race as a whole. We're all constantly progressing and changing. So things are gonna change and be different. Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the worse. But you live and you learn. Hopefully, at least.
Hopefully, some people intentionally don't learn.
Right, so I want to steer us back a little bit onto the speedrunning track again. And honestly, most of the majority of questions I have left, we've kind of already touched on or gotten an answer to in some kind of way. But based on the games you ran, I wanna mention Final Fantasy 15 or Monster Hunter World as an example here. There are different categories in those. And what separates the categories, and why do you think one is more popular or competitive than another? And is there a debate within those two games that which is the true any % category?
So I've run a plethora of games: Fire Emblem Awakening, FF4, Nier Automata, Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2, Final Fantasy 15, Okami HD, Monster Hunter World, Pikmin 2. It's all these different games. But you brought up specifically Final Fantasy 15 and Monster Hunter World. And if you'll let me, I'll also bring up Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which is the run I've been currently going back to. I don't normally go back to runs, but that has been the run that I've been reapproaching speedrunning with, because this is actually a very applicable question to that state of the situation. Using Monster Hunter World as the prime example, if we're going to look at individual levels, the only thing that differs individual level or separates individual levels is, the level of the quest. It's the monster you're fighting, the quest you're doing, and the level. So low rank, high rank, or master rank. As for any %, or maybe any % history books and any % colossal task, I think it was, those three runs, the three any %s, are divided into three. It divides any % into three parts. There's the any % history books that goes up to the first meeting of a monster called Zora Magdaros. That is the shortest of the run. It's about an hour and a half, I think. An hour and a half to 2 hours. Any % hit colossal task goes all the way up to the second Zora Magdaros meeting, and that is probably about 4 or 5 hours if you're at my pace. But if you are at world top level pace, it's probably around 3 hours. And then any percent is full any percent. World record's about like 5:10. My PB is 7 hours because I haven't run that game in over a year. What differs them mostly is stamina. And that's something that I've run into a lot with the games that I run, as I run very long categories in games. Personal stamina is very important for these games and to properly run them, or else you're not going to be able to properly, do the run. That's why categories like this are good, because if you only want to run an hour and a half, by all means, there's a category for that. Do it. Whereas if you're like me and you're masochistic and you want to run 7 hours, which my first run of that category was 14 hours, that exists as well. Final Fantasy 15, the differing categories typically are separated by whether or not you include DLC, and a very popular category was whether or not you include the Ring of the Lucy, or Lucy, or however you pronounce it. For those who aren't acquainted with the game, the Ring of the Lucy is a ring that is essentially busted. They give it to you at the end of the game, and you have the ability to one-shot most, if not all, bosses up to the end of the game from that point. So the normal any percent run, you just spam the ring. You get to a boss, you spam the ring, and it comes down to a numbers game of there's gonna be this many casts, or what I would do when I ran the game is I would go, okay, how many casts is it gonna take us to beat Ravis? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it was 4. Yeah, go. And we had a whole game about it. Sometimes I got like 1-1-1, and it was amazing. I think the best I ever got was actually 1-1-2. But yeah, they came up with a no ring category where you actually have to fight those bosses, and that was people didn't like spamming the ring against the last 3 major bosses that you should use it against. And so they made the no ring category just kind of as a way to experience the end of the game without feeling bored out of their mind holding one button for half the time. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, on the other hand, is separated by DLC and no DLC. The biggest separating factors between these two runs, I am probably the only regular no DLC runner. The biggest separating factor is RNG. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, you have to understand that the game is not going to give you good RNG most of the time. You have to be willing to accept that it will give you bad RNG and prepare around it. In no DLC, there's probably about 15 to 25 minutes of comparable time lost or gained to RNG in any given run. Whereas in DLC, the fact that you can get really, I'll call them tools because people may not know the context of the game. The fact that you can get really strong tools at the beginning of the game means that you can just blast through everything. It's a lot more reset heavy because you're not throwing yourself at the whims of RNG to get what you want as much. So there's a lot less comparable RNG time. Whereas no DLC is a lot more of a reactive gameplay. You experience the game in such a way that you have to know what to do next in certain situations because, oh, I didn't get this tool, or oh, I didn't get that tool. Okay, what do I do next as a result? And that's very much more the type of speedrun I prefer, is a very reactive and open speedrun, not a run that you're just doing mindlessly over and over and over. And that's not to diss on anybody who does speedruns like those. Like, if you do that, you do you. Like, that makes you happy. I support it. I just don't personally like it.
Yeah, if you enjoy those kind of games, I would highly suggest running Final Fantasy 9. It's repetitive with a lot of RNG.
How many encounters do you get?
It's a lot of RNG, like a lot of RNG. It's crazy. But it's always interesting to hear the difference in categories and different games that the runners who are on the show bring up.
And sorry if that was a load of information. It was just a lot to say.
No, it's fine. It's really interesting. It's interesting. But we're going to start to round off the podcast here a little bit. So I've just got a couple more questions, and then we're going to do the quick fire round at the end. But I just want to ask you there, what's the most impressive speed run you've ever seen?
Oh, God. This is a very tough one. On one hand, I could say, Ocarina of Time 100%. I'm a big fan of ZFG. I love his content, and that run is very execution heavy. But on the other hand, being somebody who ran Final Fantasy XIII, many people, including myself, hail Final Fantasy XIII as the hardest Final Fantasy to speedrun. Not because of RNG or anything like that, but because of how skill intensive it is to actually get a good time. To, do everything so perfectly. I was wondering how to improve my time one day, and Lou Dolphin once asked me. He was a former, if not current, world record holder. He asked me, how much time do you spend practicing your menus? I said, probably none. And he said, when I was working up to getting the world record, for every day for a long time, when I woke up, if I didn't have something to do, I would practice my menus. I would have saves for each menu, and I'd practice them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd get them done until I could do them with my eyes closed. And so I think when you understand the context of the Final Fantasy XIII speedrun, it is an insanely impressive speedrun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't personally seen that many of them. I've seen a few of the runs, like bits here and there, and it looks interesting, to say the least.
A lot of the abuse of mechanics in that run is stuff that if you've played the game casually, you wouldn't have even thought of.
Yeah, that's one of the most mind-blowing things about speedrunning to me, personally. Like, watching a speedrun of a game you've played casually many, many times, and then having your mind blown about
Yeah.
something you've never even thought of. That's what is fun for me when it comes to speedrunning, at least. But if you could give any piece of advice to anyone starting out or wanting to give speedrunning a try, what would that be?
Support everyone. It's a very broad statement. Unless that person you have a reason to very much dislike them to the point where you don't want to help them, just help them, support their stream, host them, anything like that. Because, like it or not, with my whole talk about how speedrunning's a hobby and everything like that, a lot of us stream with this, and a lot of us stop because we don't get viewers. I'm not trying to play some woe is me, it's just a fact of the situation. Support each other, be there for each other, and tying back to that whole conversation of, why are trans people showing up in speedrun communities, you should just be good to each other. It helps people feel comfortable and helps them be themselves, and we want to be here to support each other. It's a race against ourselves. At the end of the day, if you want it to be something more, you can, but we're here to make ourselves happy and to embrace our personal competitive spirit. So just be good to each other.
That's a fantastic piece of advice, really. Can be applied to life as a whole as well. Just saying. Just be fantastic to each other. Right, so we're going to head into the quick fire round. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you're not allowed to think for any of them. You just get to answer as fast as you can. You get maximum 5 seconds to think out an answer.
Okay.
So top of your head. All right, first question. We're jumping in right now.
Round 1.
Top 3 pizza toppings. Go.
I like mushrooms, olives, sausage.
Round 2.
If you had to speedrun only one game for the rest of your life, which would it be and why?
Probably Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's the only game I felt that I really can speedrun if I can actually get past the mental block of resetting a lot. I enjoy its level of reactivity and RNG, and I feel that I am naturally better at it than some of the other games that I've speedrun.
Round 3.
And the last one. If you were trapped on a desert island that had modern-day housing with electricity, plumbing, a bed, kitchen, a computer, what one item would you bring? And you're not allowed to say cell phone.
Well, I honestly don't have use for a cell phone because I just spend all my time on the computer. I'm basically a NEET. If I had to bring one item, my Switch.
Oh, nice. Good choice. Good choice. All right, that's gonna round up the Speedrunner podcast here. So before we end it all, or not end at all, end the podcast. The floor is yours. Where can people find you and follow you? And feel free to shout out anyone you want to shout out.
Yeah, you can find me. I stream. I don't really have a set schedule, but I stream at twitch.tv/Lexicona. You can also follow my Twitter at LexiconaTV, but I don't really post too much. I mostly just like, retweet, etc. I am hoping, though, to improve that in the future. Any shoutouts? All the communities I've worked with, y'all have been amazing, and despite my personal disagreements with people, which I haven't bothered to go into because they're, of course, personal, I've had a great experience being with most, if not all of you, and I definitely cherish my time with everyone that I've met in the speedrunning community. So thank you all.
Awesome. Well, that's going to round it up here for the Speedrunner Podcast, episode number 3. I have been Sir Penguins. You can find me at twitch.tv/SirPenguins or follow the podcast on the Twitter, which is at Speedrun Podcast. And until next time, I might just come up with a catchphrase to end this. I'll see you guys later.